Now let's bring it back down to earth for a topic that sits right at the intersection of technology and humanity: fairness in AI. AI is everywhere, from the loans we apply for, to the news we read, to the jobs we get offered. But with that power comes a question we cannot ignore: fair for whom? Because while algorithms can be lightning fast, they're only as fair as the data and decisions behind them. This next panel explores how we move from bias to balance, from blind spots to inclusion, and from black box models to transparent, trustworthy systems. So let's welcome a group of experts who are not just building smarter AI, but fairer AI. And with that, I would like to welcome Farah Ismail, SVP Chief Legal, Privacy and Compliance Officer, SE Health; Andrea Yzeiri, Chief Data and Analytics Officer and Lead AI Engineer, Picsumi; Vivek Saahil, Principal Lead Strategic Business Analysis, Pratt and Whitney, Canada; Stephen Liang, Strategic Data Governance and Data Management Lead, CN Rail; and leading the discussion is Nadia Jindali Chow, Partner of Privacy, Health and Governance, Learners LLP. Let's give them all a warm welcome, everyone.
Thanks so much, and thanks to everyone for joining us for this discussion. Welcome to our panel discussion on ensuring fairness in AI, designing architectures for equity and accountability. And we're going to focus on 3 areas in this discussion: bias, mitigating, identifying and mitigating it, ensuring accountability through the AI lifecycle, and building trust with stakeholders. We're not going to do long introductions. We only have 30 minutes, but I would encourage you to look up all of our panelists because we've got a great set of perspectives here. Farah brings the legal and compliance and privacy perspective. Andrea brings more of the technical strategy perspective. Stephen brings us governance. And Vivek brings the sort of business and analytics perspective. So with that, let's jump in. We're going to start with bias. And Andrea and Farah, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Farah, let's start with you. So from your perspective as Chief Legal, Privacy, and Compliance Officer, what are some of the concerns that you have around bias in data and how it gets integrated into AI systems? And how do you, what steps do you take to try to mitigate that risk and build guardrails into the systems?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So I think, AI really is touched by multiple regulatory regimes. There has been an attempt to target regulation to deal with this in Canada, but truth is we're really at our infancy in this country. And so without regulatory parameters around this stuff, organizations such as ours at SE Health are required to create our own frameworks. We are required to set those parameters for our people so that they know how to use AI in an appropriate way. So what this means for our organization, and I like to give the example of how we've been addressing our journey with AI and integration. We've used this multi-departmental approach. And what it is really is the involvement of multiple perspectives, from finance to operations to legal, compliance, and privacy, at all levels of the organization. And so rather than just having this one-sided directional view, these are the rules, these are the requirements, we've used everybody's perspective to build these guardrails to ensure safe implementation. So this really allows us to broaden our understanding about how AI might be beneficial for various operations, various functions within the organization. And it really accounts for, I think, multiple stakeholder perspectives and not just this one-sided unilateral approach. The other thing we've done is we have implemented a few different small pilot initiatives to enhance our operations. So we have refrained from integrating AI into our clinical practices at this moment in time, just given the complexity and the risks that might exist. And so with these operational pilots, what we've been able to do is test out the guardrails that we've developed. And so the guardrails are tried, tested, we evaluate, we tweak, as we go. And again, all of this is happening in real time. I mean, we have to adjust as we see things that are working or not working. I think also the other thing I wanted to mention was the initiative around education and training that we have used with our broader organization. So, instituting blogs. We have a large organization, almost 9,000 people, communicating in different ways, pushing out this content through other, vehicles that we have. We've also instituted a series of webinars that people come to, Lunch and Learn. I know these sound very basic, but it's a way to really spread knowledge and information about current practices. And then with respect to bias, I do think we need to tread lightly and we have to be careful given the nature of the work that we do. And so with respect to patient care, what we want to do is really educate people around the risks that might be associated with using AI within our context. The other, another area of bias, even when you're thinking about recruitment and employment practices, just generally, there are system biases that can be highlighted, and so we need to be mindful of those things. And so the way that we analyze systems that we might be integrating is by doing these AI risk analysis on the systems that are coming forward.
Great, thanks. Andrea, as somebody who has been under the hood, so to speak, what strategies have you found to be most effective in eliminating bias or managing bias in AI systems?
Well, to build a little bit off of what Farah mentioned was the fact that in Canada, there aren't that many laws that have to do with essentially ethical AI. So we find that we have to look at other frameworks around the world. I'm sure all of us have run into problems with GDPR as of late if you're bigger enterprises. Maybe you've seen CPRA in California. Maybe you've looked at what's happening in New York. My company is more in the IT HR sphere, so we're a startup, and most people think that innovation means that you have to move quickly and you don't necessarily have to be too conscious about it. And at Picsumi, we're doing something different. We're trying to build safe, reliable innovation so that way both types of users, because we are a SaaS product, we have B2C as well as B2B, feel safe in essentially including their data on our platform to find, one, good jobs and to find good candidates. Now, with that being said, what we've done is we've implemented a really strict AI strategy. We've looked at all forms of different types of bias, everything from data bias to feature bias to you name it, from end-to-end operational bias as well. And through that, we found that really focusing on our architecture has been key at kind of mitigating the risks that bias pose. So we've segregated quite a bit of data to ensure that PII is limited in touching any of our machine learning models as compared to KPD, which we call key profile data. So that's what we're trying to do.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's switch gears to accountability. And Stephen and Vivek, I want to bring you in here. So, Stephen, let's start with you. In your role as in leading governance at CN Rail, how do you embed transparency and accountability into the AI lifecycle from development to deployment?
So those are very good questions. And as someone that works in governance, governance should always be something that's part of the ecosystem. When it comes to transparency, it should be something that's really embedded inside the life cycle of the project, and in this case, it's AI. And we believe that transparency really starts with traceability. So things such as identifying and then understanding what data you're using, where does that data come from, who owns it, so stewardship, accountability, and then other things like compliance, privacy, does it meet the handling requirements when it comes to your data? All of these sound pretty basic, right? But the basics are very important, is one of the things. And the talk of transparency, accountability, that word really comes to mind. And I think one of the really interesting things that people should really understand is that accountability, it's a heavy word. It is not supposed to be about finger pointing or assigning blame, but it's really about identifying that individual that is who is in the best position to improve or solve the issue when it comes down to it. That's what accountability really means. And finally, I just want to say that governance, it's not about restriction, but it's really about enabling that response, that possibility of having that.
Just as a follow-up, vendor management is obviously an important concept in the governance space. So how have you dealt with that as CN Rail?
That is an interesting question. One of the things that we have done at work is that we think that education is a really key piece of it, because at the end of the day, not all companies are tech companies. So it really starts with the basics, like data literacy, the enablement of data, and then really changing the culture of the company bit by bit.
Great. Okay, thanks. Vivek, love to hear from you here in terms of how you think that strategic business analysis can help to drive accountability in AI deployment.
I think that's a good question, and adding on to Stephen's point, for data governance, we at Pratt and Whitney are, placed very strategically within the aerospace industry, right? And the key differentiator for us is we have lots of data, right? And when we say data, it's also the nature of data that we have, right? So we have engineering data, we have data from customers, and so on and so forth, right? And with that comes more responsibility for data governance, right? So that's the most important aspect, which I believe is for strategic analysis. The second one is obviously making sure there is no bias, right? When we have different types of data and you have big data which you can't store on a local computer, right? Things go at scale and things go fast. So it's super important that we mitigate bias. And we also want to break silos and bring all the teams together so that there is some cross collaboration and making sure that we comply with all the regulations that are there.
Some of those processes obviously would have been in place pre-AI. Have they had to be adapted? And if so, how, as you've entered this new era?
Yeah, for sure. I think with the advent of AI, as we say it, right, the world is divided between pre-ChatGPT, post-ChatGPT, right? But AI has been developing for very long, right? And that's, as I said, we need to break silos. We need to promote cross-collaboration between teams, right? And bring AI into mainstream, because there is no escaping that, it's going to stay. So we need to have all the rules in place. Obviously, if we have more technical data, and by technical data, I mean engineering, right? So it's much more difficult it's much more difficult to regulate it, right? But we do have all these processes in place, and it's still ongoing.
So I know that each of your organizations, you take a different approach to governance. So at CN Rail, it's a more centralized approach, and at Pratt & Whitney, it's more decentralized. And so I'd love to hear from each of you on what you think are the pros and cons of the model that you've adopted.
Do you want to go first?
You go first, Vivek.
Okay, perfect. So what we do is actually a hybrid model, right? We did try out both centralized and decentralized, and we realized there were a lot of drawbacks with centralized. So think about it, if you have one team, it's super easy. If you have two teams, it becomes a bit more difficult. But if you have more than 10 or 15 teams, it's super difficult to collaborate with everyone. So one of the biggest drawbacks of having just a single team monitor everything is, you have innovation lag, right? So you won't be able to accelerate your innovation at breakneck speeds. The other one is there would be some blind spots in terms of context, because not everyone has the same use cases. So what we devised is that we are going to have a decentralized system. We will obviously have policies, but we will go on a case-by-case basis. Right. There are teams which can accelerate growth, so we'll let them run, but there would be some standard policies that everyone has to comply with. And the other thing is accelerated compliance, right? So we have all these rules and regulations from the government that are coming, right? How do we make sure that we comply with them from day one onwards, right? So that helps us, this decentralized system helps us comply with that.
Great, thanks. Stephen?
So everything that Vivek mentioned, it's right. Whether you're centralized or whether you're decentralized, there are pros and cons. And where we are, we have an interesting philosophy of centralizing to decentralized. So it's kind of like, really, first, you want to come together and you want to align on the really important things, like your standards, your frameworks, your quality, and then you sort of let things go. You centralize in order to decentralize, so that you can take advantage of the pros and cons of both, where once you're decentralized, you definitely get that more agility, that availability, and then sort of that more really customized way of being able to tailor your products, your services, your service offerings. So I think that this is something that we do. And I guess in the end, we sort of settle in, it's kind of like a continuum. We sometimes move a little bit more towards centralization when it requires it, so that we can move towards decentralization. So at any moment in time, it could swing, but you could say that federation is also something that we could sort of label it as well.
So both of you are at larger organizations. So actually, Andrea, I'd love to get your thoughts, just sticking with the governance and accountability for a minute. You're at a smaller organization, so how do you guys do it?
How do we deal with data governance in general?
Yeah.
So essentially, because we are a smaller team, we're a startup, it's centralized. I mean, there isn't really much of a choice to do a decentralized model when you have pretty much 18 employees at the end of the day. So that's how we're focusing on it, and we're building it. I mean, keep in mind, our data flow and the way that it's coming in, we're at the beginning. So we have that potential to be more adaptable as opposed to large-scale enterprises. I mean, enterprises, if you think about it, they had to go from floppy disks to the cloud, and obviously there were steps in between. But we've been able to essentially start on the cloud, and we're building all of our data lakes, warehouses, different types of our data catalogs, our data dictionaries. So we're able to be a little bit more accountable because we're smaller and we're starting out first. The agility with which startups can function, I think, is one of the major benefits of being in a startup.
Great, thanks. Okay, so let's shift gears now to trust and how to build trust with stakeholders. And Andrea, let's stick with you. How have you seen fairness and the ethical AI practices that you've incorporated into your organization, how have you seen those help brand reputation and even just driving innovation?
So I think that's a really interesting question, because just to kind of go back, when you think of startups, you think, okay, they are the innovators, they're the ones who are just going to push through with everything new. But that's not necessarily true. Yes, we want to innovate for sure. We're coming up with products that other people do not have on the market yet. But are we trying to innovate in a way that essentially lets AI take control of our tools? No. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build in an ethical manner. We're trying to provide reliable tools for our users to use and feel safe with their data. Again, we're in the HR sphere. So we've seen resumes come through that have SIN numbers, for example, have all sorts of personal identifiable information that goes beyond the standard resume. So how do you deal with that? Well, we planned for that. So that way, your data is protected and doesn't end up getting even ingested by our AI model. We find that compliance is part of our brand. So it's actually part of our branding, if I'm being honest. We're redefining hiring while being compliant in a world that is just now starting to become compliant. So we can help with that too. But it's really an interesting question. I get a lot of people who ask me, oh, how are you using agentic AI? Where are you putting agentic AI? Are you going to be implementing agentic AI? Which I always come back and say, I don't think that agentic AI is ready for the type of implementation that we're doing. And I'm sure all of you are aware about the new organization, the non-for-profit that came out, Law Zero, that says the same thing, right? The most cited computer scientist, actually, he came out with this nonprofit because the idea is that agentic AI, we're not ready to implement it with the ethical AI practices that we should be thinking of. So that's how we're setting ourselves apart.
Just building on that, I'd love to hear a bit more about the process that you followed to come to that conclusion. So, who were the stakeholders involved? How did you work through that decision to get where you are now on agentic AI in particular?
So in terms of the stakeholders, it's been I want to say most of like the executive team, we've been on it. So we have our AI matching algorithm that we're building and is actually going to get launched very soon. So it's going to be for our B2B users. Essentially what it's trying to do is it's trying to rank candidates according to their skills and really like what we call KPD, which is key profile data, very objective information, including their skills, their level of education, and so forth. And what we've done is we've planned. So again, startup, we've been active for about 3 years. We've only been in sales for about 8 months now, I want to say. We have been building towards this project for the last 2 years. The executives in the company have gotten together and we're building this AI strategy before I joined on. And even after I joined on, we adjusted it. We made sure that the architecture made sense for what we were trying to do.
Great, thanks. Okay, Farah, so obviously you operate in the health space. Trust is critical. How do you build and communicate with your stakeholders to ensure that they trust what your organization is doing?
Yeah, I think, being in the space of healthcare, equivalent to banking, things move slowly. Things, move methodically, carefully, and it's important to do that because we're dealing with really sensitive data. The thing that we've done at SE Health is actually acknowledge that AI is here. People are interested in using it, they want to use it, and if we don't get ahead of it and help them use it safely, we're going to have significant risk. And so building these guardrails and that multi-departmental approach, right? So we're very centralized, but the nuance there is that we have, a multi-dimensional grouping of people who are there to make the decisions around effective use of AI. So, we've built the guardrails, we've built, a policy, we've built the procedures, but it's not authoritative. It's like we're bringing people along, and we're also learning. We're learning, we're developing, we're adapting. It is very much a dynamic approach and not this top-down approach. And I think what we really want to convey to our stakeholders, at least internally, is that, risk isn't one individual's issue in the organization. That might be part of my role, but I can't be responsible for all risks that we are exposed to on a daily basis. But teaching people about their accountability within that space and why it's important to think through some of these guardrails before attempting to integrate something new or using something new, actually, divides up responsibility. It spreads it. And it also, I think, leads to innovation. It leads to this ability to grow and scale some of these exciting opportunities that exist.
Just wanted to follow up on a point you made earlier, somewhat related. So, risk assessments are an important part of this process. Could you just speak a little bit to how you handle those?
Yeah, so privacy has always been, a function of healthcare. We have privacy impact assessments that exist. What we are endeavoring to do is actually include AI risk assessment right into that privacy impact assessment. So anytime new technology is introduced or a new initiative is introduced, we go through the PIA process. We've now added a segment around AI because all of these new tools, these new vendors we're dealing with, they all have some variation of AI integrated. And so we want to get ahead of that and make sure that we're contemplating the questions that are useful to help us make the right decisions or implement mitigating actions to prevent risk.
Thank you. I don't know if the rest of the panel wants to speak to that too, in terms of just how you've approached the risk assessment process and how it's maybe been adapted for AI. Maybe Stephen, you could.
I do have a small comment. I like sort of the things that you've said, Sarah, Farah, actually. And I think that one of the sort of important things to take note is that you'll never be able to eliminate all the risk. And it's not about that. All of the things that we mentioned here today, it's about reducing that risk, right? So the more of these basic foundational pieces that are in place, the better it is. And at the end of the day, it's these kind of things that are going to allow you to realize the ROI of your AI initiatives. It's about enablement, and all of these things should be aligned.
Got a question, and maybe Andrea and Vivek, you two can take this one. Andrea, we'll start with you. What would you say a transparent AI system looks like from a user's perspective? What would be the things that you would be trying to account for?
So in terms of transparency, what I would really, and what we are accounting for, is essentially to be able to explain what your tool does. So what Picsumi is doing is we actually do have in our policies on our platform, we explain how a tool is going to be used, how your data is going to be used, and we're also implementing some opt-out choices depending on what kind of tool it is. Obviously, letting our user know that if they choose to opt out, some of the functionality will be gone from them. And the reason why we're doing this is actually it has to do with what I mentioned earlier with regards to different laws that have come out. So for example, CPRA in California, this has to be an option for all users. And so if you're looking to expand certain tools globally or in specific areas, you have to take that into consideration. And I just believe that being transparent in general to end users, especially with AI, which is, it's become such a big word, it's become a monster on its own, that some people are fearful to use it. So why not create something that people feel comfortable with putting their data into? I mean, keep in mind, nowadays, we've all just become data points on the internet.
Thank you. Vivek, would you have anything to add to that?
For sure. I'll just add on to Andrea's point. I think it has multiple phases to it, right? The first one, which is obviously a disclosure, right? Saying that we will be using AI on your data. That's owning up to it, right, and making sure that it is properly communicated that we are going to use certain tools that were not in place a few years ago. That's step one. Right? The second one is making the process transparent and communicating how it is going to be leveraged. If we are asking for personal information or if we are asking for certain details, how they are going to be stored, how they are going to be processed, what we are going to do with it, who is responsible for it, all those rules need to be communicated clearly. And then I think the other two aspects would be obviously regulatory compliance, making sure we comply with all the local laws, making sure all the anti-privacy laws that we have, we comply with those. And then at the end, it should be, the ethical aspect of it. Some things might not be, in a rule book somewhere, but what's ethical, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think all of these combine. That's a good AI strategy.
Great. Okay. So final question, and I'll get input from each of you on it. Farah, we'll start with you. What's the single most important step that you think organizations can take to ensure fairness in their AI systems?
So I think the first thing is AI is here. It's here to stay. So not acknowledging the fact that it exists or trying to avoid it or prevent it from being integrated into an organization will leave you severely behind. And so acknowledging it, putting in those guardrails, figuring out what works with your organization, your institution, the language you speak, and making it be part of the DNA. This is where it's here to stay. I think about the days where, the internet didn't exist and how we can't live without it now. I think we're at that cusp again with AI. I mean, the ship has already sailed, we're there, but it's really, really important to build out those practices to enable safe use.
Great. Andrea?
I would say focus on your strategy, and that can be whether you're in the build phase or in strategy, go back. You need to figure out, okay, how is my data flowing? What's happening to it? Where is it going? I think before it really even touches an AI model, let alone deciding what kind of AI you actually want to utilize. And kind of more on that point is just because something is new and flashy doesn't mean that you need to use it. There's plenty of use cases where we're throwing AI at it, but realistically, we could be using maybe some kind of simpler machine learning model that might not have as much of a detrimental effect in terms of biases.
Great. Stephen?
And I think that it's very interesting. When it comes to fairness, we have to really think about, I work in governance, so compliance is always about what you need to do, but ethics is about what you should do. And when it comes to sort of subjects like this, you have to make sure that you need everybody's voice at the table. You also, like, especially for the audiences that either are affected disproportionately, all of these things should come together, and it should not be done like in a small, like, siloed group that makes all the decisions.
Right. And
Yeah.
Vivek?
Perfect. Adding on to Andrea and Steven's point, I think the only thing which remains, which has not been talked about, is the redressal. Who decides the AI is compliant and AI is doing the right thing, right? It's for the users to decide, right? So it shouldn't be a one-way street, where we push something on users which they don't want, right? So there needs to be a feedback policy, like a redressal where we improve on things, we have the continuous feedback loop, and I think that is the ultimate responsible AI framework.
Great. Well, we're basically at time, so I think I would say two things. One, I hope that what people take away from this discussion is that fairness in AI is not just a technology issue. Culture, leadership, transparency, these are all key components of the strategy. And finally, if any of you have questions, we don't have time to take questions on the stage, but I know all the panelists would be happy to speak with people after we finish, so please don't hesitate to come and find everyone. Thank you for your attention, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you very much to our panelists for speaking.